Dear Professor, thank you for the introduction. Well, my job was to make the chapter and the presentation of the topic of history of international cooperation and integration in the East Central Europe. And I found this task quite challenging, considering the amount of almost 2,000 years that had to be incorporated in a relatively brief text. Under those circumstances, I decided to focus on the basic periodization and the most important milestones, among which the attention on the territory of contemporary Poland, Czechia, Austria, Slovakia, Hungary, and Croatia was mostly paid. When introducing the very beginning of the history of international relations in Central Europe, with the insight to the beginnings of Limes Romanus on the Danube, I always used to underline my students one important fact that is present in the history of international relations, and perhaps it is also important for today. Well, now, for example, we can doubt in international law whether states are equal or not, considering the United Nations and Security Council. However, in the very past, this was out of question. It was quite clear that there is no equality between subjects of these relations. So for the first centuries of the history of East Central Europe, the typical feature was an attempt for imperial universalism. Consequently, while the Roman Empire tried to organize its power with neatness and system, at the end of the day, Roman emperors had to stop their power on the river of Danube. Within this territory, power was organized as in the unitary state. Territories behind the Limes Romanus were supposed to be under effective control, what could work in those times when the empire was able to execute this control. When we compare this Roman strategy with the strategy of later Frankish kingdom or Frankish empire, there were certain similarities and differences. Similarity was very simple. It was the aspiration for becoming the universal empire, respected and controlling behind the expanding borders. Although the aspiration was similar, the method was different. Frankish Empire was not able to organize its administration in the way that the Romans did, and thus they tried to incorporate existing units of so-called Eastern barbarians, as they called them in their chronicles, to its world. Boundaries in the sense of obligations were mostly these two: the tribute paid by a tribe and the oath of fidelity, which were of personal nature between rulers. The important question was, why should these obligations exist in these relations? What was the legitimacy of them? The answer is quite simple. For example, Bavarians argued that the reason why the Moravians in 9th century are supposed to be subjected to Bavaria was the fact that the Moravians were baptized from Bavaria, what means that in all ecclesiastical and in profane matters, they should be simply subjected to them. Under this argumentation, we can understand the Moravian reaction with a well-known mission of Constantine and method and their attempts to build their own church organization. By the same way, walked later rulers of Poland and Hungary, the building of their structures, the so-called state structures, went along with the organizing of their own churches. So we can see that the church organization, it was not only the internal matter of these countries, it was the part of international relations. The Hungarian kingdom got to similar relations in its first century as Moravians had that. While first Hungarian King Stephen I ruled in a mostly peaceful relations, with one exception, with empire, his successor, King Peter Orsolya, very well known in the history of first Hungarian kings, had to take a solemn oath of fidelity to the King of Roman German Empire, and an offer to take the oath of fidelity was performed also by his successor Andrew I. We can come across such oaths also in case of the Polish prince Kazimierz I, or Kazimierz the Restorer. These relations were of a more permanent nature in case of Bohemian Przemysls. Compared to Moravian Mojmirs or Bohemian Przemysls, Hungary was able to resist the stronger pressure from the empire. Unlike Hungary, Bohemia and Moravia became part of the Union of Roman German Empire through their obligations that have been already mentioned. Integration of Bohemia and Moravia to the medieval Roman Empire was a path to the union of self-governed countries, the union that was not able to create its own integrated and centralized model like the ancient Roman Empire. Within this union, Czech lands or Bohemian lands were capable to keep their sovereignty. Meanwhile, Hungary was able to create its own unions using similar methods as they were seen in contemporary world. Some countries were united with Hungary as associated countries like Croatia, some of them like so-called vassal countries like Galicia. Majority of these unions were of provisional nature, but as we know, for example, this union between Croatia and Hungary lasted until 1918. In the late Middle Ages, we can witness another step in the integration of East Central European countries, the dynastical unions, in various combinations created among Hungarian, Polish and Bohemian kings. And let us not forget the Austrian lands, the object of conflicts and wars between Przemysls, Arpadians and later Habsburgs. In this period, the dominant unification method was based on dynastical connections and sometimes quite cynical marriage policy. In these cases, I always think of the example of Saint Margaret of Hungary, the daughter of Bela IV, who, according to her legend, refused to be married for Przemysl Otakar II, because she wanted to stay in a cloister. Nevertheless, King Bela had many descendants to be offered to Przemysl, so the love story had turned out well for Przemysl Otakar. Attempts that could result in a serious concentration of the power of one dynasty, however, were rejected by other countries, and for the rest of the Middle Ages, some sort of balance was preserved. Dynasties of the 13th, 14th or 15th century treated with their countries like with the family heritage. The marriage policy was the same like among noble families. Successful marriage could expand the family position of the map of Central Europe. Therefore, the incapability to bear a child could be a disaster not only for dynasty itself, but for the unions themselves. As an example, we can mention the generation of Luxembourgs. Brothers Sigismund, who was also the king of Hungary, and Wenceslaus, and their cousins Prokop of Moravia and Jobst. And only Sigismund left a daughter. Other members of the dynasty did not have any children. Although Sigismund, at the end of his reign, tried to preserve his heritage and left it for his son-in-law after his unexpected death, the personal union between Hungarian and Czech countries and the Holy Roman Empire as well collapsed like a pack of cards. The most successful union was, however, created after 1526, which was, as a matter of fact, union of more unions. The Austrian countries consisted of more countries, Bohemian crown lands and Hungarian crown lands. The Habsburg monarchy for the first centuries did not have the common official name. In literature, we usually call this the Danube monarchy, the Habsburg monarchy, Austria. Later, it is also called Austrian Empire, and since 1867, Austria-Hungary. So, briefly, what was so different with Habsburg monarchy in comparison with previous integration models? First of all, there is an important biological aspect. The members of Habsburg family or dynasty had almost always have enough children. The first real descendant crisis after the death of Charles VI was saved by a right of women to succeed the throne. Secondly, in order to fully comprehend the essence of Habsburg lands union, crucial was the existence of central institutions residing in Vienna, having decision-making powers in the area of military and foreign relations. Unlike earlier personal unions vis-à-vis the Turkish threat, it was vital for the Habsburg monarchy to coordinate the military and foreign relations with a single center. This was the beginning of so-called real union, where the connection between countries was no longer only the matter of the head of the state, but they were also connected by common foreign and military policy. This integration gravity was not of the same intensity for the whole empire. Unlike the Bohemian crown lands, Hungary obtained special position facing the compromise between Habsburgs and Hungarian estates after Satmar Peace of 1711. The most basic question in relations between Habsburg monarchy countries was the question of the nature and consequences of pragmatic sanction. And the incoming crisis and turbulences of the 19th century, this question was always repeated, and the answer to this question brought the monarchy to the dualism, the result of the compromise of 1867, when again another union of unions was established. This constitutional work of art without constitution, real union without common parliament, the result where both sides had to step back represented the last phase of Habsburg Empire. And for a later development, it is very important to mention that Austria-Hungary acted as a single subject of the international law. Now the union was no longer the union of hereditary countries only anymore. It were the national movements of the 19th century challenging the dynastical right for unity and governance that transformed the structure of states, had two major results on the map of Central Europe. On the one hand, it was the unification process of state unification process on the example of Italy and Germany, and in the same time the disintegration process in connection of the right to self-determination. This process culminated after the World War I. The principal outcome of World War I was the territorial disintegration of Russian, German, and Austrian-Hungarian empires and the creation of new states. Thus, after over a century, the existence of Poland was restored, the kingdom of Serbs, Croatians, and Slovenians was created, a substantial territorial reconstruction of Romania occurred. The newly created Czechoslovak state arose as a combination of the historical Bohemian right, referring to the existence of the Bohemian crown lands, and the natural right of self-determination with respect to the territory of Slovakia and Ruthenia. The Czechoslovak example was of interest due to the fact that the existence of a so-called Czechoslovak nation was referred to. In my chapter, I introduced the most important points of peace treaties after the World War I. In my presentation, I would like to pay attention not on the question of borders or debt, but to the legal position of states. Although the political position of Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and Austria differed considerably, in the view of international law, they were all succession states of Austria-Hungary. This was due to the incorporation of a part of the former Austro-Hungarian territory and population into the Czechoslovak state, as well as taking over of a part of the pre-war state debt of Austria-Hungary. The succession states differed considerably also in respect of law, while Czechoslovakia, after its creation, belonged to the victorious bloc of states. Hungary and Austria were defeated states, and it was necessary to conclude a formal peace treaty with them. For example, interesting is that the state of war was initiated by the now non-existent Austria-Hungary. So from the point of view of international law, Hungary and Austria were not identical with Austria-Hungary. Peace treaties led to the creation of so-called Versailles system. However, after Hitler's rise to power in January 1933, Germany was gradually renouncing its obligations under the Versailles Peace Treaty. Hated not only by the Nazis, but also by a great part of the German public. The immediate threat for Czechoslovakia came mainly after Anschluss, annexion of Austria to Germany in March 1938, although such unification of Austria and Germany was explicitly banned by peace treaties after the World War I. And this is how we can follow interesting milestone of the history of Central Europe and perhaps the whole international law, the Munich Treaty. Because after annexing Austria to Germany, Adolf Hitler was able to concentrate on a new important goal, and it was Czechoslovakia. In his point of view, it was an artificial unit that has no right for existence. Hitler had some sort of luck because on the initiative of British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, who attempted to satisfy German territorial demands through negotiations in the spirit of appeasement, a meeting of four powers occurred: Germany, Italy, Great Britain, and France. And the whole conference was held in the Munich Nazi Party headquarters in the 9th of September 29th to 30, 1938. The outcome of the negotiations was the agreement between Germany, Great Britain, France, and Italy, which entered history under the name Munich Agreement or Munich Dictate. The agreement contained provisions under which Czechoslovakia was to cede the Germany the border territories with over 50% of German population. Czechoslovakia was to vacate this territory by October the 1st, and so on and so on. The history of this treaty in relations, international relations of Central Europe or whole Europe did not end in autumn 1938, because it was very important document for the restoration after the World War II. During World War II, Czechoslovak government in Britain challenged the validity of Munich Treaty and consistently achieved the nullity of Munich Treaty from the signature states, Britain, France, and Italy. In case of Germany, it was naturally impossible. After the Second World War, the history of law, the legal history of former Czechoslovakia collected arguments against the validity of Munich Treaty, and this is a very good example how to exercise with students international relations. The first argument is it was a res inter alios acta, the agreement entered into by 4 international law subjects was made against the interests of another state which did not participate the negotiations nor was a signatory of the agreement. There was an immediate threat of violence by Germany. This is the second important argument. Nazi Germany threatened to declare war unless its territorial demands were met. And the third important argument, it was a fraud on the part of Germany that did not intend to keep the rest of territory of Czechoslovakia in peace. The end of the World War II, Central European states became immediately part of the Soviet sphere of influence, even though communist regimes were not established at the same time in these countries. Different status of these states was rather attributed to classifying these states as victorious and defeated. In the light of international law, for example, Czechoslovakia was deemed to be a victorious state in respect of the war, disregarding the interesting and important fact that the Slovak state was actually the first direct ally of Adolf Hitler in his march against Poland. Post-war relations in Europe were to be resolved repeatedly through a grand peace conference. Like almost 30 years ago, it was held in Paris, with the negotiations launched on July 29, 1946. Unlike the first one, no peace treaty was made with Germany, only with its key allies like Bulgaria, Finland, Hungary, Romania, and Italy, having the status of defeated states. Although the relations among some neighboring states of the newly established Eastern Bloc were rather tense, for example, relations between Czechoslovakia and Hungary, it was in the interest of the Soviet Union as the new leader of this region to improve them. The mutual relationships were at first governed by various bilateral agreements of mutual friendships and cooperation. However, when a military organization, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was established by Washington Treaty in 1949, and as the Federal Republic of Germany was later allowed to join it, the response of the Soviet bloc was to create a military organization of its own, the so-called Versailles Pact of 1955. The Soviet bloc was about to keep its structure and consistency, as long as the Soviet Union was willing to protect this structure. As the Soviet leaders in 1989 lost this will, the new chapter of history of Central Europe began. Thank you very much for the attention.